Mesmer is not only the face of the upcoming DLC, but he's also a character of blasphemy, who stands in the same ranks of all other demigods that we know and love. After many events that will be revealed in the expansion, Mesmer is now one of many who was banished to the Land of Shadow. But what if it had been Mesmer who was called by Marika instead of the Tarnished? In this video, I will showcase my interpretation of this Elden Ring what-if scenario, while creating a build that mimics the new character. So without further ado, let's get started with my first Elden Ring what if. After leaving the precipice of anticipation, Mesmer began letting the words and grace of Marika guide him throughout the lands between. Eventually, this led him to the Third Church of Marika. Here, he called his first sight of grace, and when he sat down, he was greeted by a woman named Melina. Immediately, these two decided on working together to get closer to Marika. Melina gave Mesmer a whistle to call Torrent and told him many words of Marika. Now, with Torrent, Mesmer could freely explore the lands between. Here, he met a new friend named Bak, and Bak promised him a gift at the coastal cave, so Mesmer was sure to go there later. But as of now, the only goal he had was to find out as much as he could about Queen Marika. To do this, he would search the lands between to find as many ruined churches as he could, leading him to the Weeping Peninsula. In every church, Melina would visit and explain different words and quotes said by the queen. Eventually, Mesmer saw a church on a separate island, with the only entrance being the cave that Bak had mentioned. Inside, he found the demi-humans sprawled out in pain due to a recent ambush. Mesmer sought to get revenge for his friend. So, mesmerized by the flame, he took Bak's torch and headed deeper into the cave. Using the torch, Mesmer began performing his first incantation, Catch Flame. Demi-humans are weak to fire, so he figured it would be a perfect style of combat. Not only would he help Bak, but he would also get nearby to the Church of Marika. To do this, he had to fight the dual demi-human chief boss fight. Despite having an unupgraded seal, I didn't need to do anything for Mesmer's build here. Catch Flame is one of the strongest early game incantations, and it dealt exceptional damage. You can pretty much ignore all the other demi-humans in the arena and just focus on the two chiefs, who stay very far from one another in the beginning of the fight. Before going back to Bak, Mesmer decided to venture a little further in hopes of finding the previously seen Church of Marika. The cave opened up to the separated island, but instead of finding a Church of Marika, he found a Dragon Communion Church. The dragon screamed blasphemy, yet intrigued the prophet. But because of Marika's wishes, Mesmer left the church alone, keeping it private from both Melina and Bak. Speaking of Bak, Mesmer reunited with him back in the cave and gave him the sewing kit dropped by the demi-human chiefs. He was sure to meet with the little guy in the future, so Mesmer headed back to Limgrave. After collecting some upgrade materials, he stumbled into a finger reader. The lady begged to see Mesmer's hands. After reading their markings, she beckoned him to take the side path around Stormveil Castle to get the Rail Lucaria. Melina did want Mesmer to take exploration into Stormveil to find Godric, but it could wait. Emerging from the clustered side path, Mesmer took sight of the new region. Very close by, he found Bak, all in better shape. With this encounter, Bak became Mesmer's official seamster and, more importantly, friend. He made the prophet some rough clothes, but they were better than nothing. It's to be noted that Bak specifically made a hood that would cover all of Mesmer's hair. The red hue signified a close relationship with Radagon. There could be no association with Radagon, as he was the man to destroy the Elden Ring and wreak havoc on the lands between. Venturing further into Rail Lucaria, Mesmer eventually stumbled upon a girl named Raya, who asked him to retrieve her necklace from a bandit across the shore. Knowing he couldn't lose much, Mesmer bought the necklace and returned it to Raya. His reward was an invitation to the Volcano Manor, but it wouldn't be granted until he could meet Raya at Altus Plateau. This couldn't have sounded more intriguing to the prophet, but it would have to wait. For now, he continued his journey in Rail Lucaria. Eventually, he met with both Melina and Bak at the same site of grace. Here, Melina asked Mesmer to give Bak as much company as possible, as the demi-human was pretty lonely. Mesmer agreed to this and promised to pay the seamster many visits. After speaking to both allies, Mesmer headed back into Limgrave to enter Stormveil Castle. But first, he gave the Fire Monk's Prayer Book, something he found in Lucaria, to a newer friend he met in the Round Table Hold, Corin. The Round Table was a place of champions that Melina invited Mesmer to join, and it was here that Gideon Ofnir took the prophet in as a student. After this visit, Mesmer was equipped with 4 different fire incantations, now ready to enter the castle. First up was Margit. No weapon was needed. Catch Flame acted as an R1 swing, and O Flame acted as a R2 swing. Both incantations are splitting images of one another, but one deals less damage and activates quickly, versus the other dealing more damage with more time. Flame Sling acted as an easy range option as well. Unfortunately, Fire Surge, although looking very cool, didn't deal much damage at all. Luckily, all the other incantations were more than enough, and Mesmer could even use his torch for offense if his FP ran short. This fight wasn't difficult, and Mesmer came out victorious. Taking the main gate, Mesmer hustled through the dungeon quickly and soon came across Godric, one of the 2 shard bearers that he would need to defeat. Despite being a shard bearer, Godric held even less of a fight than Margit. Mesmer could easily use the exact same tactics as done previously and come out victorious. Flame for lawn windows, catch flame for quick damage, and flame sling for ranged defense. Mesmer, like most characters, obviously despised the pathetic lord, but he couldn't help but admire the usage of the dragon head. So when defeating Godric, Mesmer decided on exploring more about such incantations. He thought back to the Dragon Communion Church. There was surely more out there, so the prophet explored the only region he had yet to spend much time in, Caelid. After collecting his newly obtained rune, Mesmer headed back to the Third Church America and took the secret teleporter to Caelid. This was a place littered with dragons, so he knew he was on the right track. He found more churches worshipping America alongside upgrade materials for his seal, but it didn't take long to find the second Dragon Communion Church. This time, the prophet inspected the altar and found many possible abilities he could learn. The practices didn't come free though, as they required dragon hearts. But if the stories were true, all Mesmer needed were 4 incantations for his eyes to open into the communion of dragons. After collecting the Reduvia, Mesmer put out the half-dead mother of dragons slumped over in Caelid. This granted him 5 hearts, though he would need 6 if he wanted its preferable incantations. This meant the fighter would need to kill a dragon who wasn't half dead. On a corpse in the dirt of the church, the prophet looted an apostle's cookbook. These notes contained a crafting recipe for dragon wound grease, a coating cream for weapons to further hurt dragons. This could do it. Mesmer revisited Bach, who had just made some pants for Mesmer, and the 2 crafted a short spear. This would be a usable weapon for the grease, but Mesmer still needed a series of crafting materials to make the product. This list included root resin, beast blood, and gravelstone. The last item was easy. A pile of gravelstone could be found on the corpse in Caelid. As for the beast blood, Mesmer did have to tackle the challenge of killing a rune bear. Luckily, his capabilities with fire came in handy, and he could obtain the item. Last was the root resin. These were found in catacombs. Randomly, Mesmer picked the Impaler's catacombs. He didn't know why at the time, but something about the name called out to him. Soon the reasoning behind the name of the tunnels was discovered, as literal spike traps were set off. Killing monsters and zombies, Mesmer opened the seal and fought the watchdog. After an easy victory, he could finally collect the root resin. With help from Bach, the 2 travelers crafted their very own dragon wound grease. Yura was a man who had helped Mesmer kill and obtain the Reduvia, the weapon used to slay the half-dead dragon. This man told Mesmer where to find a dragon in Limgrave. Spear in hand, the prophet entered the given coordinates. The dragon swooped in immediately. Behind a rock, Mesmer could apply 1 out of the 2 dragon wound greases he made, and this worked. With just minor attacks, Mesmer dealt incredible damage. He knew the movement of fire well, and therefore could dodge a lot of the dragon's attacks. The only attacks to worry about were the physical ones. Just over halfway through the fight, Mesmer applied his second piece of grease. Dealing charged attacks while the dragon spewed fire breath, the prophet got the creature extremely low. It was here that it flew up onto a high piece of land, making attacks nearly impossible to land. To counter this, Mesmer threw his own flame sling and then finished the job with fire surge. The heart was his. Back at the Dragon Communion Church, the fighter performed his final task and ate the heart of a dragon. These transformed his eyes into a reptile state. Still a knight to America, Mesmer could start to see the benefit of blasphemy. To contain himself and hide his new face from trusted people like Melina, Bach, and Corin, the fighter asked Gideon for a mask to conceal himself and show loyalty to his teacher. Gideon, in his office, gave Mesmer what he needed. Now Mesmer needed to obtain another great rune from a shard bearer. He could ask Gideon for info on Renala or Radahn, but in truth, he wanted to seek out Rykard. Rykard was, so the rumors say, in the Volcano Manor, the same place that Raya had mentioned. He was the Lord of Blasphemy and had a major appreciation for snakes, who hold a close connection to dragons. This meant Mesmer would have to embark on a harsh journey through Mount Glenmuir, as it held the location to the manor. He asked Bach to assign him traveling gear. Mesmer also grabbed both medallions to activate the lift. After using them and reaching the plateau, he immediately saw Raya. But it was Gideon who assured the prophet that nobody associated with the manor could be trusted, and that it would be better to find the manor independently. So Mesmer obtained his new traveling gear from Bach and started a route that would go deep into the mountain. First, he cut through a small area of Altus and began traversing the base of the volcano. Not far into his journey, he was swarmed with death blight frogs, and even after a successful fight with them, it seemed true that this route was just just a dead end. It was no problem. The Prophet rerouted a path alongside the northern areas of the plateau. The new route required a lot more time in Altus and even near the capital entrance. This led Mesmer to more Churches America, Golden Order churches, and additional upgrade materials. One church was quite different from the rest. It was a church of Radagon. The strange thing was, while looting additional gravel stones, the fighter saw two soldiers behind him. They could have easily killed him with stealth for trespassing the church, but with closer inspection, they looked lifeless. Mesmer took this as an additional sign for his theory. Do not get yourself associated with Radagon. Only trust America. But at last, after days of traveling, Mesmer reunited with the grounds of Mount Glemir. The weather was clear and the air was fresh. Yet as he walked closer into the trails of the mountain, Mesmer saw fresh corpses of soldiers. He climbed a nearby rock and scouted the area. It was a war. All over the mountain there were battles held. Leyndell soldiers, probably sent by Morgott in the capital, were also trying to find their way into the Volcano Manor to bring it down. None of them would make it, but Mesmer pushed forward. Using the speed of his horse, Mesmer could climb up a ladder near the battle, just avoiding the conflict. After climbing for quite some time, he was met with a rampart tower. Hiding on a rock, Mesmer was hidden from all except one soldier who didn't prove to be much of a threat. Using the telescope, the Prophet could map out the rest of the route pretty well. The path would start with another ladder guarded by a crafted scion, which would lead to a high mountain. This mountain was connected to a bridge that led to another mountain, and just nearby, the manor. Mesmer had found it. He was close. Sneaking past the pumpkin head, the fighter was instantly ambushed by a grafted scion. Mesmer had equipped an Ash of War named Impaler's Thrust, and it's quite good against enemies like this. Being patient and waiting for Windows to use his skill, Mesmer took out the scion. The next obstacle was a series of ladders that typically had marionette soldiers awaiting the top. This is where Mesmer could test out the new dragon abilities, which were an overkill for enemies like such. Eventually, the ladder led to a merchant. Here, Mesmer could trade and sell goods, and he even got new shoes. He should have stayed and waited out the rain, but Mesmer pushed forward and reached the top of the first mountain. He just had to find the bridge. But with the rain and tiredness, he took the wrong direction and was ambushed by demi-humans. Knowing how much he loved Bach, Mesmer couldn't bring himself to kill the little ones, and was instead forced to take shelter in a nearby cave. Unfortunately, more demi-humans began to attack, and Mesmer had no choice but to fight back. Eventually, he fell down a hole right into an army of enemies. He ran, tricked the leader into falling, and then killed her. The rest he left alive. In search of a way out, while trying to avoid the remaining demi-humans, Mesmer stumbled into a room with natural light. This was a way out, and he only needed to fight a few enemies to survive. In a short fight, Mesmer came out victorious, though his eye caught a nearby item. It was a coiled shield, a snake that had been placed onto a wooden board. Mesmer took a great interest into the little thing, and he could even use his dragon eyes to communicate with it, making the snake an ally immediately. He took the shield and he left the cave. The weather was clear, and after riding Torrent for a short time, Mesmer found the bridge. This led him to a small base of another mountain. Here he could use the spirit spring and quietly make his way past a falling star beast undetected. Alas, he had made it. The base of the volcano and the gates to the manor were at sight. Scouting the area, the fighter saw one final obstacle, a giant, blocking the door. Conveniently, Mesmer could walk alongside a spike of rock and hop down onto another, bringing him to the surface of the manor. Out of nowhere, the troll used incantations that originated from the Flame of Frenzy. Mesmer couldn't help but admire the battle tactic. Using his dragon incantations, he bit the giant twice and then thrusted his spear into the troll's face. Repeating the process was enough. Mesmer had officially entered the manor without any assistance. Inside, he met Tanith, and with Raya's invitation handy, the Prophet became an undercover member. He began exploring in hopes of getting closer to Rykard. This led him to the Temple of Igle. Gideon had warned Mesmer of a godskin noble in the temple, so using his knowledge from Bach, the fighter crafted sleeping pots. This fight was a breeze. The dragon incantation staggered the noble and dealt incredible damage. Combining his spear with this, Mesmer hit 3 punishers during the fight, and even finished the job with his coiled shield. Before continuing onward, Mesmer stopped and wrote the coordinates of the most beautiful snake sculpture he had seen. He would surely revisit this place. After exploring the outskirts of the manor more, Mesmer found a promising portal that could lead to Rykard. Instead of fighting Rykard, Mesmer found the serpent that had devoured him. It was glorious. But with America's intentions in mind, the Prophet picked up the nearby Serpent Hunter spear, and thus the fight began. At first, Mesmer began to doubt the strength of the snake. Every blow from the powerful spear stunned the reptile, but just as he thought the fight was over, something happened. It was Rykard. Mesmer had found the embodiment of blasphemy. He couldn't help but laugh. Keeping a distance, the fighter kept swinging the spear in various ways, stunning and staggering the Lord. He used his practices of fighting from his journey and slayed the beast. Mesmer took a well-deserved break after his expedition ended. He reported all his findings to Gideon and claimed 2 great runes. After this, he met with Bach, who adjusted his outfit to something more suitable for the capital. With 2 great runes, Mesmer could go there and get closer to America. The only obstacle blocking his way was the Draconic Tree Sentinel. At this point, Mesmer had so much fighting experience that he began to have fun. Dragon incantations were his strongest attribute and came in a vast variety. Using them to his advantage, Mesmer defeated the Sentinel easily. He was officially in the capital. Here, he met with Melna and Bach, who both took shelter in a storage room. In order to make Bach feel truthfully appreciated, Mesmer visited one of the many churches that he had discovered and picked up the golden sewing needle and kit. He gave the set to his dear friend before taking step into the city. Transversing on the rooftops, Mesmer made his way through the capital. This led him to a speared version of Godfrey, created to prevent Mesmer from getting to Marika, as she had to be close. Instead of being too fancy, the prophet just used his spear. Dodging attacks and punishing when necessary, the fighter won another battle. Finally, he was near the base of the Erdtree, but instead of fighting whoever stood before, Mesmer first wanted to learn more about the queen he had devoted so much towards. He met with Corrin and Altus, who told him that a man named the Gold Mask was their best chance at finding more information. While searching for the Gold Mask, Mesmer ran into the finger reader that had beckoned him to reroute around Stormveil Castle. Funny enough, she told him the whereabouts of the manor, but followed with a curse of Marika. This intrigued the prophet, but he pushed forward. Eventually, he saw the Gold Mask and met with him. Mesmer told Corrin and brought him to the location. Later on, the 3 scholars met in a grassy hill of the capital. This was when Mesmer began doing lots of searching on his own. Back in Godfrey's arena, he picked up the Golden Order's Principia and gave it to Corrin. This taught him the Law of Regression spell, and the Gold Mask told Mesmer just where to use it. But he couldn't use it just yet. The Law of Regression spell cost 40 intelligence, meaning Mesmer would have to defeat Renala in order to respect his attributes. Luckily, Renala wasn't much compared to the past enemies Mesmer had defeated. Using his draconic abilities, Mesmer defeated the Queen of the Full Moon. He reassigned his levels into intelligence using a larval tear to rebirth himself. He prepared to use the Law Regression. At the statue of his enemy, Radagon, Mesmer performed the spell. He couldn't believe it. Mesmer put his anger aside. He had come too far to stop now, though he couldn't help but test the capabilities of blasphemy further. Using Rykard's remembrance and his newly acquired stats, Mesmer was able to cast Rykard's Rancor. This spell summoned a skull followed by a flurry of fire blasts. Maybe Rykard wasn't so horrible after all. Mesmer decided to check in with Bach one last time before going to the base of the Erdtree. The little guy wanted a larval tear for himself to undergo rebirth. He wanted to appear as a human, not a demi-human. Considering most demi-humans had tried to kill Mesmer, and taking into account how much he cared for his friend, Mesmer fetched another larval tear. He gave it to Bach, who then said he would begin heading to Rael Lucaria. While Bach set off, Mesmer met with Melina to defeat Morgott, the Omen King. The two worked well together in combat. Morgott would take turns focusing on each person, making one take defense and the other take offense. Thriving in battle, the two warriors acted as siblings. Finally, Morgott fell, and the path to America was complete. At least, it should have been, for this is where everything fell apart. The Erdtree had unburnable roots. Melina explained how she could bypass them. If the two couldn't burn the roots, why not try to burn the whole tree? He already hated Marika for her lies, and he didn't want Melina to sacrifice herself. Still, if it was truly needed to be done, he would continue to trust her. Before setting off to the mountains, Mesmer decided to check up on Bach with his rebirth. It had been done. Bach was unrecognizable in a human state, but he wouldn't say anything. He stared into Mesmer's draconic eyes without a word. Mesmer blinked, and then Bach was dead. It was the final straw. Marika was a traitor, and Mesmer's friend was dead. And burning the Ur-tree would require Melena's death as well. The prophet wouldn't let it happen. He would turn the blasphemy. He thought back to the glory of Rykard. He was a misunderstood demigod. Mesmer just knew it. The prophet recalled the giant guarding the Volcano Manor, and his use of the frenzied flame. Despite it being an evil force, despite it opposing Marika's wishes, and despite it betraying Melina, Mesmer needed to inherit it. It would save Melina. Mesmer made his way into the sewers full of hatred. He killed the Omen Guardian without hesitation. Melina stopped him. She begged him to walk away from the frenzied flame. Mesmer didn't really care. He wouldn't let her die. He continued through the sewers, and eventually he came to the grounds of chaos. Once again, Melina appeared. Her words just weren't strong enough. Mesmer finally released his mask, letting his royal hair free. He removed his armor for the frenzy ritual, and finally, he inherited the flame of frenzy. It was done. Immediately, Melina announced her departure. She promised that she would fight and kill Mesmer if he were to become the Lord of Chaos. He ignored her. Using Bach's golden sewing needle, he returned to the temple and made himself a uniform. This was the first time he had no seamster, no friend to help him, but it didn't matter. He kept his snake shield and upgraded his spear to the partisan. Its red cloth suited him. Mesmer took the Ash of War impaling thrust and put it on his weapon. He would officially refer to himself as Mesmer the Impaler. He grabbed another larval tear and rebirthed to scale with his incantations. He chose his favorite mix of fire and dragon spells. He even upgraded his seal to the Dragon Communion seal and made his way to the mountaintops. While traveling to the next enemy, he found Corrin and the Gold Mask suffering in the cold. They couldn't even recognize him. Later on, he found another Church of America. This time, Melina did not appear. Nonetheless, he pushed on and met with Fire Giant. Using his snake companion, he poisoned the boss. Then, using both horseback and regular fighting, he kept poking the giant until he fell. Finally, he could burn the Ur-tree himself, saving Melina. The Prophet woke up in Farum Azula. Here he collected more upgrade materials and resources. Next was the Godskin duo. Mesmer had already faced one noble before, so he used the same strategy of sleep pots and dragon spells to get a victory. At this point, nothing was a threat to his power. To upgrade his spear even further, Mesmer used the Flaming Strike Ash of War for Malekith. This worked incredibly well. Phase 1 was over after a stagger. Phase 2 went well as well. Another stagger occurred and Mesmer finished the job with the Sling of Fire. He collected the Rune of Death and used its power to burn the remains of the Ur-tree. This put him back in the capital. Here, he found Corrin sobbing and bashing the words to the Gold Mask. Corrin called Marika's order the definition of perfection, so Mesmer killed him. Nearby, he found the Gold Mask dead. He was now sure that all of his allies and friends were dealt with. Mistakenly, he found his teacher, Gideon, in his way. Using his Dragon Bite and another Ash of War, the Flame of Red Maids, he began to fight his teacher. It was one of the easiest battles he had ever fought. Disappointed, he watched as his teacher failed to stop him. Mesmer sat in Marika's bedchamber for one last rest. He then re-equipped his Impaling Thrust ability. Calling back to when he crafted the Dragon Wound Grease, Mesmer made Fire Grease. This grease worked perfectly against Godfrey. Mesmer could reapply it during the fight and swing it endlessly at his enemy. Eventually, Godfrey fell to Mesmer as well. And now, with excitement, the blasphemous man Mesmer the Impaler met his old queen. She emerged as Radagon. Mesmer hated him and the two began fighting immediately. Mesmer stood on the ranks of a demigod himself. He was no prophet, and he was stronger than the Golden Order. In the real timeline of Elden Ring, this remains partly true. Mesmer was sent to govern the Land of Shadow. We will all meet him. I warn you to prepare for his fight. But back in this timeline, Mesmer killed the Elden Beast which had spawned from Radagon's corpse. He was done. After all this time, he had found her. Marika was right in front of him. But it wasn't over. Mesmer had forgotten. Melina lived on. She only had one goal, and thus, the two warriors would begin their battle. Mesmer versus Melina. Tell me who you think would win. Okay. This was a very different video from my other stuff. To be honest, I have no idea how this video is gonna look when it's published. As I'm writing this, I can only hope it's coming out somewhat cool. This is a new series I'm hoping to adapt, where I discuss my interpretations of a what-if scenario, while still making a build to show players. My next major video will be about Plaid, but I plan to make that like my normal cosplay videos. Also, me and my friends in my Discord have been working on an Elden Ring movie. We definitely need some help filming, so if you guys play on PlayStation and are interested, join the Discord and let us know. As always, thank you so much for the support. I just hit 1.5k and I'm so grateful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.